Oh, there we go. Hello to Facebook too. Hi, folks. Welcome to History Matters. And we're having a coffee conversation. Coffee really does matter to some of us and yet not to others. At any rate, so today I will explain in a moment where the idea for today's topic came up. It's a little meandering, but it's logical. The title I came up with, which may not be a good one, was Who Hates Democracy? And I'll explain that in a moment too. But before I do that, we need to turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. Delighted, as always, to be with you every Friday. Looking forward to today's topic. I was intrigued by the title that Joanne posted. And I just wanted to remind everybody that if you're joining us, please put your questions in the Q&A. We've got a robust chat going. If you're Zooming in with us today, I know people make comments on Facebook as they watch, but it's really important that if you want Joanne to address a question at the end of the talk, it's got to be in the Q&A. So please enjoy, and we will see you in a few minutes.
And I will also add, if you are a first timer to History Matters, let us know in chat, because the History Matters community is a pretty amazing community, and you will be welcomed into that community if you will let us know that you're here for your first time. Okay, now, so two things got me going on this topic. As ever, very often we come to a Thursday at around noon and I start thinking, nothing obvious has come to mind. And things that come to mind, I go back and I look to see if we've talked about them before. And at this point, however many episodes it is, and I can't remember right now, but over 2 years, we've talked about a lot of things. Not that someone just said it's their first time, missed the name, but everybody please welcome that person and I will find it at the end. I'm trying not to look at chat. At any rate, there, okay, Susan, wonderful. Welcome, Susan. So sometimes something in the news will obviously set me off on a track. This week, as ever, I was trying to decide what I wanted to talk about. There were any number of ways I could go, but I do try, believe it or not, to remain focused on the history side of History Matters and not only to talk about contemporary political issues, although I very much, and I'll do it today as I always do, want our discussion of history to inform the way that we're confronting with and dealing with political challenges of the moment. That's really what I've been trying to do. But for this week, something I saw online set me off, which reminded me of something, a response, which I think I've mentioned before, to a tweet that I sent out first thing in the morning, like silly person that I was. And that's what set me off on this topic, Who Hates Democracy? So the thing I saw online was, and I'm not going to go in this direction, but I will at least cite the quote, was someone saying, and I'm not going to get the words right because I didn't go back to find the precise quote, but it was someone stating on camera online that, and it was a public commentator, so it wasn't, I love the word rando, it wasn't some rando person, said something like the most, it was either the most attacked group in America or the most disadvantaged group in America is straight white men. Now, there are many responses one could have to that statement. In some ways, based on everything that we see before us, it makes no sense, because who has ever had power in the United States? Pretty much straight white men. So how does that make sense? That led me to think about something that I've been working on, writing very slowly, but writing. And I wanted to do something I've only done maybe once or twice before, and that is read you just a paragraph which shows how I linked that statement with the topic that I want to talk about today. So I'm transforming my presidential address for the Society of Early American Historians into an article. That's what's happening very slowly, but it is happening. And it's on the politics of outrage, but I talk a lot about victimization in the piece. So this is a paragraph on victimization and democracy. It's counterintuitive, but important to grasp. To maintain their supremacy, people in power are often fueled by a sense of victimization, sometimes sincere, sometimes strategic, to break laws, rules, and norms, and opt for violence. To those who feel entitled to power and unwilling to lose it, any challenge to their power is victimization. That includes free and fair elections, the rule of law, and accurate legislative representation, which can readily disempower power holders. In this way and more, a politics of victimization can be profoundly anti-democratic. It's easy to see how power holders who refuse to give up power pave the way for authoritarianism. In their eyes, democracy itself is victimization. So that logic, that, and I say sincere or strategic, if you sincerely believe, regardless of whether it makes sense to others, if you sincerely or strategically believe that you are a victim, and particularly like that statement, that straight white men are the most victimized people of all, that's a statement coming from people who assume that they have always been in power and they should always be in power, and any challenge to that power feels like victimization. And here's the tricky thing about a politics of victimization. If you really feel that you're a victim and you can portray yourself like a victim, that justifies a lot of things, or it can justify a lot of things if you're being strategic, right? If you say, oh no, I'm a victim, I must fight back. A politics of victimhood can justify violence. So you get a sense of where my article is headed here. But the larger point that I wanted to make here was how it can be that people in power find their way into claiming to be victims, and perhaps even feeling like victims, and to maintain their power, to stay in power, they almost by definition have to be against democracy. Otherwise, what is democracy, right? It's contests. It's based on electoral contests that are ideally free and fair. There aren't guaranteed outcomes, again, ideally, for the most part. You don't know, or you're not supposed to know in elections who will win, what they will want, what will appeal to the voters, what will not. And someone will get bingo. If there's someone here who is new, for I don't know how long we've been playing, I haven't been playing. Our wonderful community has been playing bingo based on what I say. And I probably have said this word more than any other word, and that is contingency, right? Democracy is grounded on contingency. It's grounded on contest and contestation and debate and compromise. So if you really feel that you absolutely must remain in power, by definition, that's not democratic. It's not a democratic way of thinking. So who hates democracy? Well, to some degree, it's people who assume they really don't want to be out of power. And if you can convince yourself or others or both that somehow or other you're being victimized, that can conceivably justify some pretty ugly politics. It's one of the reasons why this seems unrelated, but it's the same dynamics. One of the reasons why way back in early America, in the age of dueling, if you were engaged in a fight with someone and you kind of seemed to be working your way towards a duel, you always wanted to be the victim of an insult and not the person giving the insult. Because if you were a victim of the insult, then you were justified in fighting the duel. You were justified in doing whatever. You weren't a sort of horrible person tossing out insults. Oh no, you were a victim, defending your name as a victim should. There's a kind of power to claiming victimhood. Now, once I got into this cycle of thought, and I think I've mentioned this before, and I will sort of apologize if I have, but it's worth repeating. Connected to this is the tweet that I unwisely tweeted out first thing in the morning, lying in bed. How do you open Twitter? Hey, here's the first thing in my brain. And I said, I don't think people realize what they lose when they lose democracy. And I think I have mentioned this before. And it got thousands and thousands and thousands of responses. And interestingly, to me, first of all, most of them were what one would hope, which is, I think that's true. And I think democracy's in danger. So the majority were down the middle lane, but on the right and on the left, this is my left. I'm not going to try and figure out what your left is. On the right and on the left, there were answers that were remarkably similar, which I didn't expect. So on the right, a number of people said, oh, to heck with democracy. It's not working anyway. We need something better. Like that didn't obviously console me in any way. However, on the left, some people were saying, well, democracy, we've never had democracy. So I don't know what we should be doing now, but American democracy has never worked. So left and right, people were saying, in essence, who cares about democracy, right? Democracy doesn't work. We don't need democracy. That surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't have, but it did. And it's part of the same idea. Who hates democracy? Well, it actually, as that anecdote suggests, can be a complicated answer. It's partly about power, and it's partly about ideas and ideals. And a point, I'm not going to go into it in detail today, but it is worth thinking about. And I am working my way through this as I'm writing. Democracy, when we talk about democracy, in a sense, we mean two things, and they're intertwined, they're related, but they're two things. One of them is the idea and ideal of democracy, and one can say we've never absolutely managed to reach the ideal of democracy. The other is the nuts and bolts of creating democratic governance. When we talk about democracy, we're kind of talking about both things, and I don't think we always pause to think about which of those two things we're referring to. I think based on the anecdote that I just gave, right now, both of those things are in trouble, but it's worth thinking about the fact that they're not necessarily the same thing. And with that, I want to go back to the founding and talk a little bit about how they thought about democracy as a way of leading us back to the present. Now, democracy in a 18th century sense was not, well, let me put it this way. Democracy on the one hand was threatening to people in the 18th century. And on the other hand, they believed that they were creating a more democratic government than what had come before. So they looked at monarchy, they looked at what they were creating in a republic, which is a democratic form of government. People want to say it's a democracy, republic, it's a democratic republic. But at any rate, a republic was a more democratic form of government than a monarchy. So they believed, like, look at us, right? This is great, new world, we're more democratic. On the other hand, a lot of the people in power were very uneasy about what that meant. And I've talked before about their fear, their ongoing fear of demagogues, that one of the major risks of a democracy, of any kind of democratic government, is that a demagogue rises up and panders to the public and appeals to their passions. As Hamilton says in a letter, passions, all capital letters, and gets people to follow after him. And at this point, it would have been a him. And then once he has power, does whatever the heck he wants, and thus governments get overturned, and thus democratic governments fall, and thus you end up with tyranny or anarchy. So demagogues are one way in which people were afraid of democracy, but another way that these power-holding men feared democracy was just the will of the multitude. Because as much as they prided themselves on being more democratic than the old world, they were not thinking about democracy as we sometimes ideologically or idealistically define it today, right? Rule by the all. Their idea of democracy in a strict sense was a government where all take part, not a representative government. They were looking back to ancient Greece. They were looking back to classical civilizations, and they were saying, "Ooh, like, we don't want that." And why? Well, in part, we can't trust the people like that. Like, really trust the people to that degree? Like that's, demagogues are scary, and so is untamed democracy. And some examples here that I pulled actually from when I discuss at the very beginning of my American Revolution course, I talk about, I don't remember if it's like Freeman's top 10 tips for studying early America or something, or top 5, I don't remember what it is. And one of them has to do with thinking about the meaning of words at the time. And one of the words I always focus on is democracy. And I think about this all the time. So when I gave this lecture, and I gave this particular version of it 12 years ago, and I still remember this, what I said was, by our standards, democracy is a good thing. And I said during the lecture, sometimes when you say something in a lecture, I'm quoting myself here, it comes out of your mouth and you think, wow, that's going to look really strange in student notes. I'm imagining student notes saying, democracy is a good thing. At the time, I thought, how silly. Why would one need to say that? And now 12 years later, I think, yeah, we actually need to be saying that now. Times have changed. But regardless, to them, the word democracy, the idea of democracy as I'm discussing it here, was not necessarily a good thing. It meant mass politics. To some, it meant absolute chaos. So on the one hand, you could have someone like Alexander Hamilton in 1804, on the night before his fatal duel with Aaron Burr, writing the following: "I will here express but one sentiment, which is that the dismemberment of our empire is interesting, will be a clear sacrifice of great positive advantages without any underlined counterbalancing good, administering no relief to our real disease, underlined, which is democracy." Now, admittedly, Hamilton, not so much Mr. Democracy. He's not the best example of someone that we should be shocked at that he's speaking against democracy. But here's Thomas Jefferson, who we often credit with being someone who is speaking for democratic ideals in some way, if we push slavery out of the way, but still more democratic minded, I suppose you could say, than Federalists. Jefferson said in 1816 that democracy would be impractical. You can see why I got the ickle in there, would be impractical beyond the limits of a town. Now, he added very quickly that democratical but representative government was a good thing. Democratical but representative government, which is essentially what we have now, is democratical representative government. He says that would be good. So he says not democratic, but democratical, which is kind of one step removed from democracy. But generally speaking, we are looking at a group of men, relatively elite men, who felt that, generally speaking, other men like them should be in power, and more of them could be in power than would be true overseas. And yes, you had to be white, and yes, you had to have a certain amount of wealth, and yes, you had to be of a certain status in society. But to Americans at the time, all of those things were easier to get or easier to be than in Europe generally, but particularly in England, where things were a little bit more entrenched. So these are people who talked about democracy in a different sense, preached that their government was democratical, more so than other countries, and very much believed that only certain kinds of men should be in power. And so what you partly see, and I mentioned in a tweet yesterday that the Federalists were going to have a moment, what you partly see in the course of the 1790s, and particularly the late 1790s, the Federalists, Hamilton and Adams, their wings of the Federalist Alliance, they pretty much are in power for the 1790s. And they clearly assume that they should be in power, and that these Jeffersonian Republicans, not only do they not agree with us, but who are they trying to give power to? They're scary. They're going to overturn the whole thing. So you end up with Federalists in the late 1790s speaking out very strongly about how democracy may be threatening, how we need to really, Hamilton's statement, our real enemy is democracy, right? We have to worry about what democracy does, as I started out by saying, because we have power and we believe we should always have power. And what looks to us like democracy is going to take our power away, and thus it must be destroyed. Now that's the early republic, right? Their idea of democracy, as I'm emphasizing here, is not exactly the same as ours, but the idea, the logic behind it, that democracy can threaten people who assume they should always be in power, that logic rings true. So basically, if you want to control who has power in a semi-permanent, ongoing, unquestioned kind of way, which certainly the Federalists would have been happy to do, democracy, democratical government can be a problem. So I see I'm running out of time, so I want to bring this home. How does this relate to the present? Well, in part, I talk about this to alert us all to think about victimization claims. Think about the logic, and as ever, the emotion behind what is all over the place in every form of media these days, right? Claims, I'm a victim, we're victims, we have to do something, we're being victimized, victim, victim, victim. That, on the one hand, is a powerful claim. On the other hand, can, as so many things that we've talked about on History Matters, drive up intense emotions, which I always caution us to. If you're feeling a strong emotional response to something, take a breath and think about if someone really wants you to feel that strong emotional response. So if you're hearing, not even if, when you're hearing all of these claims about being victims, think about the claim and who's making it. Is this a person who has power and doesn't want to surrender it in any way? You know, who is the person claiming to be a victim? In what way are they suggesting that they're a victim? And what are they suggesting that should be done about it? We marginalize all kinds of people. There are people who are victims within our political system. But when you have power holders of one kind or another using that kind of rhetoric, and using it to encourage others or motivate others, you really need to pause and think before responding. I wrote down here, you need to focus on the actual impact of, and this is an 18th century phrase, would have made sense then, men and measures, right? Think about the actual impact of men and measures when people are talking about victimization. In other words, think about people in power and their measures, what they're doing and what they're wanting above and beyond the rhetoric that they're using, which could be a really powerful rhetoric. And it's for good reason that people use it. Some people sincerely believe that, whether we might agree with them or not. Others are really strategically using it, and it can be put to great use strategically. So basically, think about what people are saying and who is saying it when they're complaining about being victims and about somehow or other something's being taken away from them. Think about what it suggests about what they think about the working of our political system, how willing they are to acknowledge and allow for free and fair electoral contests, how willing they are to comply with free and fair electoral contests that have been proven free and fair if challenged. And then, because they've been challenged and proven free and fair, they're free and fair. So think about what people are actually saying with their claims about what they believe about democracy, if they believe in democracy, and what their political thoughts and implications and their sense of a proper political dynamics, what that looks like in reality, and how democratic that really is or isn't. Democracy is one of those words, and I say this when I'm teaching all the time too, that I tell my students that in my classes, they're not allowed to write in what I call democracy speak. And by that, I mean, particularly if you're taking an early American course, like a big lecture course for me, more so even than a seminar, the temptation often for students is to, liberty, equality, democracy, freedom, sort of throw around all these big phrases. If I ask them to write a paper reflecting what X kinds of people thought in X kind of period in early America, what they can't do, and I talk about it very specifically, is that freedom, democracy, equality. First of all, because those words, whatever they meant then, is not what they mean now. Secondly, those are big, vapid claim words that need to have a reality beneath them. Democracy, there's a reason why we talk about it all the time and we're hearing about it all the time. It is being seriously challenged and undermined. But for that very reason, we need to think about how people are talking about it, what they're suggesting about it, and how open they seem to be to a political system grounded on widespread participation by all who are justified as citizens, who are enabled as citizens to take part in the system, and in that taking part in a system with contests that are contested and that we don't know the outcome to. That's democracy. It can be ugly, it's unpredictable, it can spawn violence, it has many vulnerabilities, but the alternative is uglier. Okay, 2 minutes passed. I'm going to stop there. And there's the mug. Okay, so this mug is not going to be a surprise. It makes total sense. And it made me think about the fact that I said this a long time ago, and I said it with a very explicit meaning in mind. And then today it made me go back and think about what I meant. Thank you for engaging in democracy every Friday morning. What I meant when I said that was, and is this a Carolee mug? It is a Carolee mug. Thank you, Carolee. What I meant, and I've said this many times, and I'll say it again probably at the end, what I meant was our being here and having these kinds of discussions, not just me pontificating, but us then having a conversation about these topics. That's democracy, right? That's debate, conversation. I don't know what questions you're going to ask, and I don't know where our conversation will take us, and neither do you. And our being able to assemble here as a group of people, regardless of who we are, and have these kinds of really important conversations about where we are right now politically and where we've been in the past and the road to the present, that's democracy full force. So that's what I meant by that statement. I then, when I picked this, realized on the back, the first thing on the back is contingency.
Bingo.
Okay. I will stop there.
Well, as you can imagine, we've got tons of great questions. So you ready to jump in?
Okay.
All right. Our first question comes from our friend Sandra, and she says, Dr. Freeman, could the straight white persecuted American man also be an extension of Jesus on the cross persecution mythology? Fitting
Wow.
into the narrative that Jesus was threatened, entrenched in power over time. A long shot tangent question for the evangelical white victimhood claim on the right. Woo, we're coming in hot today, kids.
I know. Asking a Jew. But no, I'm not going to in any way pass judgment on the credibility or logic behind that claim. I will say there's a reason why the victimhood of Jesus has power, right? That him being persecuted and tortured and killed, readily, obviously victimized in some way, that has a real power to it. That's, Jewish synagogues, where's Rabbi Beth? I hope she's here. Jewish synagogues do not typically have images of people around. You're not supposed to, focus on graven images. So in churches, the fact that, there's, depending on the church, there's Jesus or there's Mary or different people, that's a direct connection to this idea, the humanity, right, of Jesus. I don't need to tell this to you guys. So, but I think the one thing I can say about that coming in hot question is there are many reasons why that aspect of Jesus and his story and his life and his death has real power. And again, victimhood, real victimhood or claimed victimhood, that's a really powerful thing to be able to claim. It justifies, and I'm not saying this about Jesus, but it can justify a lot of things that can be very ugly and that seem necessary and justified because you are being victimized. That's the danger of that kind of logic. Religion, it has its own logic that I'm not going to delve into. I remember having a sort of crisis of faith in college about Judaism, and finally sort of meandering around and talking to people and reading things and going to the rabbi. And then ultimately the rabbi said to me, you're not going to be able to prove or disprove this. That's what faith is. And it was like, oh, I understand that now. So faith and religion is its own category. But I do think the question, bringing up the idea of victimhood as something that can be powerful religiously and thus outside of religion, depending on how you're using it. Yeah, I think that's true.
I think that was a lot of people in the chat are like, oh, that question, mic drop. Get all the rest of the questions. Like, yeah, we're right?
That was a question.
Okay, we're gonna try and have some other questions, even though that one was like a big
that one, yeah. And I have to say that, I hopefully answered that question reasonably well, but that was a scary question.
You did a good job. Okay, this is from our good friend Dale. Says, do you think John Adams felt victimized after losing the presidential election, considering that he left the mansion in the dark?
Well, John Adams always felt victimized. And I always say that he's the Rodney Dangerfield of the founding. There might be folks here who are too young to know who Rodney Dangerfield is, but he was this comic, and his line was, "I don't get no respect," and that was basically John Adams. So he always felt victimized in one way or another, and he a favorite manuscript. I have many favorite manuscripts, which would be obvious by now, but one that touches on this directly is a letter from John to Abigail leading up to the election of 1800, where he loses the election. And he's trying to explain to Abigail that he's pretty sure he can adjust to the idea that he might not get reelected. And it takes him a really long time to say that, right? He's trying very hard. I might not win. I think I kind of am at the point where I can grapple with and maybe even accept the idea of, and then his handwriting gets like 3 times bigger, and he writes, Thomas Jefferson, United States. He has not gotten to the point where he can accept it. He can't even put it on paper like in normal handwriting. So yeah, he in some way, I see 1776 coming along there in the chat. In some way, yeah, he felt victimized. I don't think he necessarily meant to storm off in high dudgeon when he lost the election. There wasn't a grand tradition, as there has been. A lot of the traditions of people sticking around, president staying, transition of power, that idea has had different meanings over time. But he definitely, for much of his life, felt that he was giving and doing, and he never got any credit for it, and history wouldn't remember him. And he was angry that Thomas Jefferson got all the credit for the Declaration of Independence. So yeah, he clearly conceived of himself as a victim, but to his credit, he's maybe had the best sense of humor any one of the sort of major league founders. So that kind of tempered the sense of entitlement somewhat, so that he's not entirely sort of off the charts unpleasant. There's something about him that's charming, and that's because he's insecure and has a sense of humor, even as he's feeling entitled to power and victimized.
All right. Dave has a question. George Lakoff, I hope I didn't mispronounce that, a cognitive linguist, talks about things like how important it is to frame an argument. One powerful way to do that is to state incorrectly that I'm a victim. By responding, one often restates or reinforces the lie, then tries to use facts to counter the argument. It seems like powerful people today saying they are victims is a long way from the culture of dueling. Do you care to compare and contrast, he asks.
You guys, man,
they're really on it.
I know. Wow. I do. So the first half of that, the idea that framing what you're saying can have a huge impact. I'm all over that, right? I'm really interested in the rhetoric of politics. And actually, when I talk to graduate students and they're preparing for their oral exams, one of the things I always talk about with them is how they frame their answer, that they should start out by framing the answer, partly for themselves, because then they'll have a sense of where they're going, but also for the audience, because they'll prime the people testing them to hear what you want them to hear. So framing in a whole bunch of ways is crucially important. The second half of the question, bring it back to me.
The second half was, seems like powerful people today saying they're victims is a long way from the culture of dueling. And they wanted to know if you want to compare those.
Well, on the one hand, yes, it's very far removed. On the other hand, though, the fact that you always want my point about dueling was appearing to be the victim was very beneficial to you, even in something as seemingly remote as a duel. If you were the victim of an insult, you were justified in doing whatever you needed to do. So yeah, although fundamentally dueling culture is about reputation, right? I think sometimes people see the word honor and think, dueling is about honor, like something lofty. It's about reputation, and honor is a possession. It's not necessarily a lofty thing floating in the clouds, and dueling is about defending reputation. So there's actually a very self-interested component in dueling, which is why it's so interesting in the realm of politics. Politicians who engaged in duels in one way or another were trying to promote their reputation, and that's a really interesting thing to do in a democracy. So I think you're right that it's very far removed, but the human dynamic of it, I think, is very similar. I think, and that's not to say that I would certainly never say, and this is one of the things I'm writing about, you can't go back to 1805 and say, like, this emotion and culture remains true forever. You have to look at things in their context, but the human component there of, if you can claim you're a victim, you can justify a whole heck of a lot in response. That's a sort of gut logic that I think rises bigger than some more specific things grounded in a time period.
Okay, I've got everybody in the chat saying, I don't know if I'm awake enough to handle this level of questioning. I think our students say that sometimes, don't they, Carolee? Okay, so here's
I will say that I wouldn't know that I'm awake enough. I'm really, really tired this morning. So the fact that I'm in here in the mix, I am honoring you guys by like being here for this level of question.
Right. Okay, this comes from our good friend Cece. She says she follows someone who's in the legal profession on social media, and they talk about accountability a fair amount, particularly related to our last president. And they said this person has said interesting things about how democracy is hard, it takes thought, but authoritarianism is easy for people. She wanted to know if you could comment on that idea. Is it a lot easier to be authoritarian, either in early America, current, or both?
Well, so first accountability, then authoritarianism. Accountability is the heart of democracy, right? Democracy, accountability, meaning if you give power to someone, they're accountable for how they use it. And if they misuse it, they should be held accountable. I've said more than once on Twitter, if you go on Twitter and you search for my handle and the word accountability, you will get a lot of tweets, because again and again and again, I've said we are in a crisis of accountability where no one is being held accountable for things that people should be held accountable for. And if no one is held accountable for clearly undemocratic, anti-democratic criminal measures, that's a big problem, right? That's a big problem. So accountability, huge as a part of democracy. And once again, is accountability should be a bingo entry. Once again, I've lost the second half of the question. Accountability was the first one. This is a sign that I'm really tired, you guys.
She was saying that this person says that authoritarianism is easy. So, do you want to compare and contrast that?
Oh, yeah. So on the one hand, yeah, authoritarianism is easy, meaning you just give power to someone and they can do whatever the heck they want with it. And you really just need to shut up and sit down, right? Now, of course, you also need to not say things, not do things, not think things, not want things, not cross the people in power in any way. So easy is a complicated word in this case. But if you're saying that an authoritarian government requires less of people in a government, on the one hand, you could say yes, because it doesn't matter what people do. They have no power. But the exhaustion component of being a citizen in an authoritarian government is that you're spending all of your time triple thinking everything that you do and trying not to do things and trying not to offend people and trying not to say the wrong thing, and you have no power over someone coming after you, even if you don't do any of those things. So it may seem easier, but there's a kind of negative energy that authoritarianism commands, and adapting to that, dealing with that, I think that's more exhausting than thinking like a responsible citizen and holding people accountable for their actions. That in and of itself seems really hard right now. It shouldn't seem as hard as it is. It's part of the foundation of our government, and the fact that it seems so hard right now, as I said before, we are in a crisis of accountability on many levels, and it shouldn't seem as hard as it does.
Yeah. Great questions this morning. Okay, here's one from our friend Gloria. She says, did not the Federalists accomplish a great deal? What is writing with their, I'm not sure if she misspoke. She says, what is ring with their conduit? Okay, I don't know if I can do this
Wrong?
question. I'm not
What
sure
is
if it's
wrong?
maybe what is wrong with their, she has continuation, but I think she might mean continuation. Was not Jefferson engaging in hyperbole in 1800? Sorry if I mangled that, Gloria.
Okay, well, I'll start to, Gloria can tell us what she meant. I could start to answer it. Yeah, the Federalists, in those 10 years, they did a lot, but the direction of the country and the direction of the populace and what they wanted, a spirit that was unleashed or fueled by the revolution, was a more democratic government. So the Federalists were trying to hold back where the nation was moving towards. And that's why the late 1790s is part of why the late 1790s are so passionate and violent and nasty and polarized, is because it's another one of these moments where kind of fundamental aspect of the United States is being debated. In that case, it really is. How democratic a government is this going to be? The election of 1800 for many people signaled, or the victory of Jefferson signaled, oh, things are going in a different direction than they seemed to be before. And the public appears to have voted for that. Certainly that's how Hamilton took it, right? When you look at his letters in 1802, 1803, 1804, he basically says, this is not, I didn't think this is where this country was going to go. Actually, he says, quote, this American world was not meant for me, which is kind of heartbreaking. And by that, he means wherever it's going, that's not what I thought the country was going to be. And, already was kind of, I think, preparing himself to not be active in politics and to be a political commentator. He was seemingly getting organized in a way to have another Federalist-like project where people would write essays on American government, which fascinating. Obviously didn't get to do much about that. But at any rate, I think it's not that the Federalists did do some things that were pretty upsetting, like the Alien and Sedition Acts. So they were pretty open about wanting the American public to sit down and shut up between elections. That was not what the American public wanted. So the question isn't so much, did the Federalists do nothing good? They did some very good things and set some very good precedents. They also were acting not as democratically as the American public seemed to want for the most part. And people like Hamilton were pretty quick to call the military in when on protest, right? So Hamilton was pushing towards a kind of government that, generally speaking, Americans don't seem to have wanted. And Federalists knew that in the late 1790s, and that's some of what was driving their politics.
I'm processing that because I'm thinking about the response to, I can't remember what order it happened in, but when the protests were going on after George Floyd was murdered, and they shut down that area when they wanted to take the picture with the Bible, when the president had the protesters like rubber bullets and tear gas to get him out of the way so he could have a photo op.
Right.
It just made me think of that. And then also the here in Virginia, when the monuments protests were going on, and those protesters were treated, pushed back and tear gassed and that thing by the local. But then when the January 6th happened, they didn't turn tear gas on those folks, right?
Well, right. And this is not fully what we're talking about today, except that the general point there, which is protest, meaning nonviolent protest, is fundamentally democratic. We have a right to express our views about the government.
Hamilton called in the military just triggered that. Sorry if I went off topic.
So, calling in the military, and in Hamilton's case, we got to call in the military because if people can question government like this, we're sunk.
Yep.
Well,
Carolee said they need a rule book for explaining who does and doesn't get tear gassed, right?
Clearly.
All right. This is from Bailey. Our new friend Bailey says, regarding the politics of victimhood, can you speak to any significant uses of martyr rhetoric, whether religious, pseudo-religious, purely political sense in the early republic? Was the idea of a martyr very rhetorically important or useful back then, or was it an unused angle?
Ooh, man, you guys.
You today.
Let me think about that for a minute. Well, they didn't say that about Hamilton. They did kind of pitch after he died in the duel, what would Hamilton think? What will we do without Hamilton? But they didn't go up on the martyr angle. It's a really good question. I mean, my gut response with no evidence at all is that in colonial America, there might have been some of that, and it would have been infused somewhat with religion. But in the period that I focus on, right now, off the top of my head, I can't think of that kind of rhetoric. And it may very well be because people were sensitive to that kind of rhetoric because it was so clearly connected with religion, and religion was much more immediate to people at that period. And people would have gotten and that kind of reference might have gotten a more powerful response. But this doesn't mean the index card of sources in my brain is not coming up with an example of that, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But right now I'm not able to come up with one, which is interesting.
I'm trying not to watch the chat, but I can't help it. People said that you're going to need to take a nap after today, and they feel like they're making you defend a dissertation. Oh my gosh, it's just making me laugh. All right, Bailey, that was a good one. Okay, here's another one from Gloria. Hopefully I'll do a better job of this one. Forgive me, Gloria, for the last one. It says, has not the word democracy and the word fascism both become meaningless today? They're being used by both the left and the right to serve their purposes.
there are a lot of words that are meaningless right now, and those are two. Yes. Woke is another one. Civil war is another one. There are a heck of a lot of words. And of course, this is not new to this moment, right? That's politics plays the rhetoric game. You play with words and you get one that sort of works the right way. And this has always been the case. But given how fraught this moment is, and how extreme people feel the moment is, and in many ways, I think it is, that rhetoric, that seemingly obviously problematic rhetoric, it may, like we may know when we see people talking about democracy or fascism, everyone calls everyone a fascist at this point. And the fact is, I've thought about this a lot, right? It has a specific meaning. And you could, I've thought about doing like the dictionary of democracy and going word by word and talking about here's the real meanings of these things. And that's one of the words that I think about defining, right? What actually is fascism? These things all have specific meanings, but now, as in, again, the period I've been talking about today, late 18th century, the word aristocrat. No one wanted to say, you shouldn't say the word aristocrat. Everyone was throwing that around. There's a quote from a politician leading up to the election of 1800, and he says something to another person in a letter along the lines of, whatever you do not use the word aristocrat, because as soon as it comes out of your mouth, bam, like that's, you lost control of any conversation, because that word is so loaded now, like all of these words that people are talking about. So yeah, in a sense, those words have no meaning. But if you're talking about the word fascism, that's a problem. I think the same is true for democracy. If you're talking about some pretty fundamental words to the essence of who we are as a country, and people won't agree on what they mean or are throwing them around in the way that right now people are throwing them around, that normalizes their having no meaning, in a sense. That's a problem, to have a vast understatement. But I see that happening, particularly with the word fascism, and it raises my hackles every time I see it. And it does make me want to, like, I shall now define all these words. But what would that help? I don't know. The people who already understand that these things are being used as rhetoric would follow along happily with me, and the people using them as rhetoric might not follow after me. So I don't know.
Yeah. We've got some great questions today. All right. This comes from our good buddy Dale. It says, this is a question. Never mind. I've often heard historians talk a lot about democracy being a full contact sport. And he wanted to know if you would comment on that. That makes me laugh.
Well, it is demanding, and it has vulnerabilities. And in a democracy, people understand that they have rights. Right? I mean, if you're a citizen, you get certain things as a citizen, right? You have certain rights as an American citizen. And part of what that means is, the same thing that's enforcing accountability, that isn't necessarily calm and pretty all the time. And democracy specifically, because it's open to public opinion, it's easily swayed and moved and manipulated and warped. So democracy, the thing that's glorious about democracy, which is the way in which it can truly reflect the public and is open to change, those are the very things that also make it at times dangerous. Right? They're one and the same. So, a full context for it, I don't know. But some of the things that are special about democracy make it vulnerable in some ways. And that's always been true about a democratic mode of government. But that's a reason why it matters as citizens that we watch what's going on, we think about what's going on, we stand up for the rights that we understand we have under the Constitution. And we try and enforce the rule of law, not in a vindictive way, but in a actual basic, real way.
All right, this one comes from our friend Sandra Peters. It says, what is the earliest example of successfully holding a president or influential political figure accountable in US history? Who had the power to hold power to account in colonial times?
Well, part of the answer to that actually is the press. Not necessarily colonial America, but certainly early America, that colonial America newspapers mattered. But once the government kicks off under the Constitution, and actually during the Revolution, the press is supposed to be a tool of accountability. The press is supposed to be watching what people in power are doing and reporting that to the people, so the people will understand what these people in power are doing and can respond accordingly. So it's kind of a system. And part of the way that system works is, most obviously of all, votes. But, protest was an acceptable part of the political process even before the revolution, right? If people felt that someone was overcharging for bread or milk, you would have protests against the person overcharging of some kind. I mean, actual physical protests of some sort or another. So I've also now lost track of where I'm going, guys. I'm so tired. I can't even tell you. I hate when I do that. I did that once in England, and I was like giving an address, and I was like, there are 3 reasons for this, and I got through 2, and then I was like, yeah, I got nothing.
Yep. That's why I gotta write on your hand.
You guys could see where I'm headed, even if I'm so tired that
they said it's because you're a human, that it's okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, so the next one we have is from Bobby. It says, being a debate, mock trial, American Legion oratory, etc., for over 42 years, I always credited education as important. Yet some of our current Congress people went to very prestigious institutions and support election deniers. How can this be? Does power overpower education? Wow.
Well, right. This is, you guys, man. It's like you planned in advance. There's a reason why many in the founding generation focused on education. Jefferson, of course, did so on paper all the time. And the reason was, you can't defend your government, you can't hold people accountable, you can't recognize attackers against your country or your government if you don't fundamentally understand the government, the history, the country. You need a certain amount of education. Even, I mean, I think in Jefferson's case, like every white man of a certain kind gets 3 years of education. But education was important in part for some of the reasons that I think people are now saying, oh, we don't really need education. Why do we need it anyway? It's important because citizens need to be informed, to know what's going on, to understand the meaning of it, and to speak up either through their representatives or through protest or through organizing. All of these things, voicing what they're saying, those are things that are born by being, informed about what's going on. That's part of being a citizen. So yeah, education is huge. You might say that it's almost, in a sense, part of the political process of democracy. And if people are slashing at education, and particularly public education, which is a whole different conversation, that can seemingly be a way of making people be compliant and non-threatening, because you're cutting avenues that will engage and encourage people to question and to understand motives and intentions, and understand the history of how we got here, and to see beneath some of the things that we get told that are exceedingly untrue.
Yeah. I know we're a couple minutes over, but there's one last question. And you know how much I love to clear the deck.
You do. Let's give it a try at this point.
Okay. I think this is an easy one.
All those questions, as tired as I am.
And plus it's Dale, and we just love Dale. Okay, so he says Sally Jenkins' book, The Real All-Americans, states that football is the real all-American sport, because like our founding, the game is based on violence and power. He just wanted to know if you would comment on that. That's a good one to wrap up with.
Wow.
I haven't
Wow.
read that book, but
No, me neither.
in the queue, but I haven't read it.
I mean, off the top of my head, I haven't read it, so I don't have anything crucial to say about it, except that certainly makes sense to me. Violence, competition, and power with an audience and big sums of money involved.
Yeah.
There are aspects of that certainly seems true. It reminds me of there's a book that I always forget the title of, because it's like duels, noses, blah, 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 blah. It has all of these words in the title that I never remember, but there's an essay in there about baseball and why Southerners didn't like to play baseball. And I remember the article, the argument, because it's so interesting. I have no memory as to whether I thought it was convincing or not, but the argument of this article was, in baseball, you have to run. You have to run base to base. You have to, and Southern men, nope.
Nope.
Like, no one's going to make them run for anything, right? There was a whole dimension to baseball that just did not appeal to Southern culture. I have no idea how credible that is, but Greenberg, I think the name of the author was Greenberg, and it has the word duels and noses in the title. So I'm sure some of you.
Sure, Tim will find it in 5 seconds.
Of course, you guys. Richard Greenberg. I used to know this.
Someone will find it.
Someone will find it. And it's a really, I'm sure if you Googled, Southerners and baseball and
they're probably already Googling it.
Yes, I was gonna say, you guys. At any rate, okay. So we're a couple minutes late. Let me say, as ever, I really do want to thank you for engaging in the conversation of democracy on yet another Friday morning. What I was thinking, oh, there it is, you guys. Honor and slavery, lies, duels, noses, masks, dressing as a woman, gifts, strangers, humanitarianism, death,
That's
slavery.
all one title?
Yes, this is why I'm telling you guys, and baseball's in the mix. Kenneth Greenberg, thank you very much. That is, this is why I do not remember the title. I never remember titles.
I don't think Kenneth Greenberg remembers the whole title in order.
Probably not. At any rate,
a book with 15 words in the title. It's really good. You can buy it.
What I was thinking about this morning was, and I don't know why this came to mind, but I know a lot of you have said either here in chat or privately to me that History Matters has gotten you in some ways through the pandemic, which is one of the reasons why I started doing it. But what I discovered once we were in motion is that History Matters helps me get through a lot of things as well, because there's a community here and we have these kinds of discussions. And rather than sitting by myself fuming and angsting about things, we engage in these conversations, and immediately you can understand in a community why they're important to think about, and appreciate the fact and enjoy the fact that there is this amazing community of people who we've been here for each other for a very long time. So anyway, I wanted to say that. Don't know why that popped up this morning, but more important than that, or less important than that, but more immediate, let's put it that way. We are now going to head into the after party. What that means, if you haven't been here before, is that we will stop recording, meaning that we can be more open and casual and freer and easier in our conversation. If you have joined us online through the NCHE website, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are joining us from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and you need to join us through this link, ncheteach.org/conversations, ncheteach.org/conversations. Get right in there, click on that, and poof, you will be in the after party too. I know, I don't know why this is like now autopilot for me.
We have hand gestures now, poof.
I know, poof. Whenever I appear on TV, there are always people who are like, stop talking with your hands. It's like, really? Not possible. At any rate, everyone have a wonderful week. And I aim to figure out a topic before Thursday, and maybe I will. One way or another, we will be together on another Friday. And everybody, Stay safe, and thank you, Annie, and thank you, John.
All right. So when we